The lunch rush at the Silver Spur Café was in full swing when she fell. I heard the crash before I saw it, the sickening thud of a body hitting tile, followed by the sharp clatter of a porcelain cup shattering across the floor. My head whipped toward the sound, and there she was. An elderly woman sprawled near the entrance, her designer handbag spilling its contents across the scuffed linoleum, her silver hair falling loose from what had been an elegant bun. Nobody moved. The business types in their pressed suits kept eating their overpriced sandwiches. The college students didn't even look up from their phones. A woman in yoga pants actually stepped over the fallen lady's outstretched hand to reach the cream station, and then someone laughed. It started low, a snicker from one of the suits in the corner booth. Then another joined in. Within seconds, the cafe filled with the ugly sound of strangers finding humour in someone's pain and humiliation. "Probably drunk," one of them muttered loud enough to be heard. "Or high," another added. "Look at those expensive clothes. Bet she's popping pills." My hands tightened around the coffee pot I was holding, rage flooding through my veins hot enough to burn. I'd seen cruelty before. Grew up surrounded by it in Dusty Springs, Montana, where compassion was considered weakness and kindness got you trampled. But this casual disregard for another human being, this was something else entirely. I set down the coffee pot and moved. "Mom?" I dropped to my knees beside her, my apron brushing against the spilled coffee and shattered porcelain. "Mom, can you hear me? Are you hurt?" Her eyes fluttered open, pale blue, sharp as glass despite the pain etched into her weathered face. She had to be in her 70s, maybe older, but there was something about her that spoke of steel wrapped in silk. Even sprawled on the floor of a cheap cafe, she held an aura of dignity that made the laughing crowd look like the fools they were. "My ankle," she whispered, her accent cultured, expensive. "I think I've twisted it. Don't move, let me help you." I glanced around at the gawking customers, my voice rising with barely controlled anger. "Somebody call an ambulance!" More laughter. A businessman in the corner raised his phone mockingly. "What, and wait an hour for them to show up for some random old lady? I've got meetings." "Then leave," I snapped. "Nobody's stopping you from being a worthless piece of—" "It's all right, dear." The woman's hand found mine. Her grip surprisingly strong. "No ambulance, just help me up, please." Something in her voice stopped my protest. It wasn't weakness or resignation. It was authority, the kind that came from a lifetime of being obeyed without question. I slipped my arm under her shoulders, taking most of her weight as I helped her stand. She was lighter than I expected, fragile in a way that made my chest ache. How could anyone laugh at this? "Easy now," I murmured, guiding her toward the nearest booth. "Let's get you sitting down, then we'll see about that ankle." Behind us, the laughter continued. Someone made a comment about trailer trash playing nurse. Another suggested I was angling for a tip. The words bounced off me like rain off stone. I'd been called worse by better people. I settled the woman into the booth with as much gentleness as I could manage, then knelt to examine her ankle. It was already swelling, the skin around it turning an ugly purple-black. Definitely sprained, possibly worse. "I can wrap this for you," I said, already reaching for the first aid kit we kept behind the counter. "But you really should get it looked at by a real doctor, Mom." "Magnolia." Her lips curved into a small smile. "My name is Magnolia Blackwood. And you are?" "Dakota Hayes." I returned with the first aid kit and an ice pack, kneeling again to tend to her injury. "Though most folks just call me Kota." "Dakota." She tested my name like she was tasting fine wine. "From Montana?" "Yes, Mom, little town called Dusty Springs." "Oh, you wouldn't have heard of it." "Perhaps not." Her eyes tracked my movements as I wrapped her ankle with practiced efficiency. Another skill picked up from a childhood spent patching up ranch hands and broken things. But I'm quite good at remembering names. And faces. Something in her tone sent a shiver down my spine, though I couldn't say why. There you go. I secured the bandage and gently placed the ice pack on her ankle. Keep that elevated and iced for the next 24 hours. If the swelling doesn't go down, you need to see a doctor. Promise me? Magnolia's smile widened, and for just a moment, I saw something dangerous flicker behind those pale blue eyes. I promise, dear Dakota, and I always keep my promises. The bell above the entrance chimed, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. I felt it before I saw it, the sudden hush that fell over the cafe, the way every conversation died mid-sentence, the almost palpable shift in atmosphere. I looked up. 3 men stood in the doorway, and they didn't belong. Not here, not in this shabby cafe that served day-old pastries and burnt coffee to ungrateful customers. These men wore their danger like expensive cologne, subtle but unmistakable. Dark suits, cold eyes, the kind of stillness that came from absolute confidence in their capacity for violence. But it was the 4th man who made my breath catch. He stood just behind the others, taller, broader, carrying himself with an authority that made everyone else in the room shrink without even realizing it. His suit probably cost more than I made in 6 months. Dark hair, perfectly styled, a face carved from stone and shadow, sharp angles and brutal beauty, and his eyes. God, his eyes. Green as summer grass and twice as merciless as they swept the room before landing on the woman beside me. Madre. His voice was deep, rough with barely controlled emotion. ¿Qué pasó? Magnolia's smile turned radiant. Colt, mi amor. I had a small accident, nothing serious. The man, Colt, crossed the distance to us in 4 long strides, his attention fixed on his mother with a laser focus. But I felt his awareness of me like a physical touch, the way a predator always knows exactly where every living thing in its territory stands. Who did this? He asked quietly, and somehow that soft tone was more terrifying than any shout. Who let my mother fall? It was an accident, Magnolia said quickly. The floor was slippery. I simply lost my balance. And where? Colt's gaze finally shifted to me, and I felt the full weight of his attention like a punch to the chest. Was the staff? I stood, meeting his stare with one of my own. I'd grown up around men who thought intimidation was a personality trait. I'd learned early not to flinch. The staff was busy serving ungrateful customers who apparently forgot that human decency comes before their precious lunch meetings. One of the other men inhaled sharply. Magnolia's eyes widened slightly, then crinkled with what might have been amusement. Colt's expression didn't change. You helped her. Of course I helped her. She was hurt. And the others? His gaze swept the cafe, and I watched as every person who'd laughed suddenly found their food extremely interesting. What did they do? The silence was damning. They laughed, I said flatly. They stepped over her, made jokes about her being drunk or high, then went back to their sad little lives without a second thought. I see. Colt looked back at his mother, his jaw tight. Can you walk? With help, yes. Dakota has been very kind. Dakota. He repeated my name, and something about the way it sounded in his mouth made my pulse skip. You work here. For now. At least until my shift ends in... I checked the clock on the wall. 3 hours. Not any more. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then showed me the screen. A bank transfer notification. $25,000. Consider this your resignation bonus. I stared at the numbers, my brain unable to process what I was seeing. $25,000. That was more than I'd make in a year slinging coffee and taking abuse from people who looked through me like I was invisible. I don't understand. You helped my mother when no one else would. You showed her respect and kindness in a room full of jackals. Colt's green eyes held mine. That debt must be repaid. But more than that. He paused, something flickering across his face. My mother needs care while her ankle heals. Someone trustworthy. Someone who already proved they'll put her well-being above everything else. I'd like to hire you. The world tilted slightly. Hire me to do what exactly? Be her companion, her caretaker, whatever she needs while she recovers. He named a figure that made the $25,000 look like pocket change, plus room and board at the family estate, full medical coverage, and complete discretion regarding anything you might see or hear. That last part was a warning dressed up as a condition. I might have been poor, but I wasn't stupid. The suits, the money, the way everyone in the cafe was now pretending to be invisible, this family was either incredibly wealthy or incredibly dangerous. Probably both. What if I say no? I asked carefully. Colt smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen, not because it was cruel, but because it was genuine. Then you walk away with the money, and we never speak again. But something tells me you're not the type to walk away from someone who needs help. Damn him for being right. I looked at Magnolia, who was watching our exchange with barely concealed delight. Whatever game she was playing, I was apparently a piece on her board. But there was also genuine warmth in her eyes, real gratitude for what I'd done. And beneath everything, there was that practical voice in my head screaming at me not to be an idiot. This was my chance to stop living paycheck to paycheck, to stop serving coffee to people who treated me like I was less than human. To maybe finally have something that resembled security, even if it meant stepping into a world I didn't understand with people who scared me more than I wanted to admit. All right, I heard myself say. I'll do it. Magnolia clapped her hands together softly, radiating approval. Colt nodded once, satisfied, and somewhere in the back of my mind, a small voice whispered that I'd just made either the best or worst decision of my life. Good. Colt helped his mother stand, supporting her weight with ease. Our Garcia will collect your belongings from wherever you're living. We leave in 20 minutes. I need to tell my manager. Already taken care of. He showed me his phone again. A text conversation I couldn't fully read, but I caught enough. The cafe owner had just received an offer to buy the building, an offer he'd accepted. You're free to go. I stared at him, this stranger who'd just casually bought an entire building to avoid the inconvenience of me giving notice. You're insane. Practical. He guided his mother toward the door, then paused to look back at me. Coming, Dakota. Or do you need more time to process? I grabbed my purse from behind the counter, ignored the slack-jawed stares of my former co-workers and customers, and followed the most dangerous man I'd ever met, out of the Silver Spur Café and into a life I couldn't possibly have imagined. As we left, I heard one of the business types who'd laughed earlier whisper to his companion, was that Colt Blackwood? The Blackwood family? Oh God, that woman was... We laughed at her. We laughed at Magnolia Blackwood. I didn't hear the rest. Didn't need to. Whatever I'd stumbled into, it was clear these people knew exactly who the Blackwoods were. And based on the terror in their voices, I was starting to think I should have asked more questions before climbing into the back of a luxury SUV with a family of beautiful monsters. The Blackwood estate wasn't a house. It was a fortress disguised as a mansion, sprawling across what had to be 50 acres of manicured gardens, high walls, and security that would make a military base jealous. We drove through 3 separate checkpoints before finally pulling up to the main residence, a massive structure of stone and glass that looked like it had been transplanted from a European castle. "Home," Magnolia announced cheerfully, as if this palace of power and wealth was just another cosy cottage. I couldn't find words, couldn't process the sheer scale of everything I was seeing. The fountain in the center of the circular driveway probably cost more than my entire apartment building. The front doors were solid oak, intricately carved with patterns that looked like they'd taken years to complete. "Dakota," Colt's voice pulled me from my stunned silence. "This way." He led us inside, his hand steady on his mother's elbow, and I followed like a woman walking through a dream. Or a nightmare. The distinction was getting harder to make. The interior matched the exterior, opulent without being gaudy, powerful without being ostentatious. Every detail spoke of old money, real influence, and the kind of taste that came from generations of knowing exactly what mattered. "The East Wing is being prepared for you," Colt told me, guiding his mother to a sitting room done in soft creams and golds. "For now, stay close to my mother. Make sure she's comfortable. I have business to attend to." "Business." Magnolia settled onto a plush sofa with a sigh. "Always business with you, mihijo. The business keeps us safe." He kissed her forehead gently, a gesture so at odds with the dangerous man who'd terrified an entire cafe that I actually felt something shift in my chest. "I'll be back before dinner." He left without another word to me, and I was alone with Magnolia Blackwood in a room that probably cost more than I'd earn in several lifetimes. "Sit, dear." She patted the sofa beside her. "Let's talk." I sat, very aware of my stained apron and cheap uniform against the expensive furniture. "Ma'am?" "Magnolia, please." She smiled, and up close I could see the laugh lines around her eyes, the wisdom in her face. This was a woman who'd lived, who'd survived things I probably couldn't imagine. "Tell me about yourself, Dakota. The real story, not the summary." Something about her tone made it impossible to lie. Or maybe I was just tired of holding everything in, of pretending I was fine when most days I was barely treading water. "Not much to tell," I said. "Grew up poor in Montana. Mama died when I was 12. Daddy drank himself to death 3 years later. Spent the rest of my teenage years bouncing between foster homes and ranch work. Saved enough to get to the city, thought I'd make something of myself." I laughed bitterly. "Instead, I've been serving coffee to people who treat me like furniture for the past 5 years." Magnolia's hand found mine, warm and solid. "You remind me of someone." "Who?" "Me." She settled back against the cushions, her gaze distant. "I grew up poor too. Dirt poor. In a town so small it didn't even have a name. My father was a rancher who lost everything when I was young. My mother took in laundry to keep us fed. I learned early that kindness was a luxury we couldn't afford." I stared at her, trying to reconcile this elegant woman with the picture she was painting. "What changed?" "I met a man." Her smile turned soft, sad. "Roberto Blackwood. He was complicated, dangerous. Everything my mother warned me against, but he was also kind, in his own way. He saw something in me that no one else did. He gave me choices when the world had given me none." "And you chose him." "I chose survival. Love came later." She squeezed my hand. "My son is very much like his father. Cold to the world, fierce to his family. He doesn't trust easily, Dakota. But he brought you here, which means something." I didn't know what to say to that, didn't know how to explain that I was terrified and intrigued in equal measure, that every instinct screamed this was wrong, while my treacherous heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, this was exactly where I was supposed to be. "What does your family do?" I asked instead. Oh, everyone at the cafe seemed terrified when they realised who you were. Magnolia's expression grew carefully neutral. We're in import-export, security, property management, various businesses across multiple industries. Everything she said was technically true. Everything she said was also complete nonsense. I might have grown up poor and uneducated, but I could read between lines just fine. You're telling me you're criminals? I'm telling you we operate in grey areas that people in glass towers prefer to ignore while enjoying the benefits of our services. She tilted her head, studying me. Does that frighten you? It should. God knows it should. But I'd grown up around criminals. Petty ones, desperate ones, stupid ones. The Blackwoods were something else entirely. They were professionals, organised, smart enough not to let their violence spill into public view. I think, I said slowly, that I've been poor enough and overlooked enough to know that the world ain't black and white. Rich people break laws every day and call it business. Poor people do the same and go to prison. The only difference is money and connections. Magnolia's smile was radiant. Oh, you're perfect. Absolutely perfect. For what? For reminding my son that not everything in this world has to be cold and calculated. That sometimes the most valuable things are the ones you can't buy or steal or threaten into existence. Before I could ask what she meant by that, Colt returned. His expression was thunderous, his jaw tight with barely controlled rage. What happened? Magnolia asked, instantly alert. The Rivera family happened. He pulled out his phone. I showed her something that made her face go pale. They're making moves, bold ones, stupid ones. How bad? Bad enough that I need to respond, soon. His gaze flickered to me and I saw him hesitate. Dakota, would you mind giving us a moment? I stood grateful for the excuse to escape the sudden tension filling the room. Of course, I'll just... Actually, Magnolia's voice stopped me. She should stay. Colt's eyes narrowed. Madre. She's part of this household now. If there's danger, she should know. Magnolia's tone brooked no argument. Besides, I suspect Dakota is quite good at keeping secrets. Aren't you, dear? I looked between them, feeling like I'd just been pulled even deeper into waters I didn't understand. I don't tell tales, if that's what you're asking. It's not about tales. Colt moved to pour himself a drink from a crystal decanter. It's about survival. The Rivera family controls the Southern Territories. They've been pushing into our operations for months. Today they made it personal. He showed me his phone. The image made my stomach turn. A warehouse burned to the ground and spray painted across the remaining wall. Blackwood bleeds soon. They're threatening you, I said quietly. They're declaring war. Colt drained his glass in one swallow, which means this house, everyone in it, becomes a target, including you, Dakota. I'll understand if you want to leave. The money is yours regardless. I should have run. Should have taken the money and disappeared before I got caught in whatever bloody conflict was brewing between criminal families. Should have remembered every hard lesson my short life had taught me about staying out of other people's business. Instead, I looked at Magnolia, saw the worry she was trying to hide, saw the strength that had carried her from poverty to power. Then I looked at Colt, saw the weight of responsibility crushing his shoulders, saw the lonely determination of a man who'd chosen to protect his family at any cost. I'm staying, I heard myself say. Your mama needs someone and I gave my word. Besides, I smiled without humour. I've survived worse than rich boys playing gangster. Colt's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those green eyes. Respect, maybe, or recognition of a fellow survivor. Then you need to learn the rules. He set down his glass. First, you don't leave the estate without permission and escort. Second, you see or hear anything unusual, you report directly to me. Third, If something happens, you run. You don't try to be a hero, you don't hesitate, you just run. Understood? Understood. Good. He moved toward the door, then paused. And Dakota, thank you for helping my mother, for staying. It matters. He left before I could respond, and I was alone again with Magnolia, who was smiling like she'd just won a prize at the county fair. What? I asked, suspicious. Nothing, dear. Nothing at all. But her eyes told a different story, full of schemes and satisfaction. Whatever game she was playing, I had a sinking feeling I'd just become a key piece. And God help me, I wasn't sure I minded. The first week passed in a strange blur of luxury and tension. I tended to Magnolia during the day, helping her move around as her ankle healed, reading to her, listening to her stories about Roberto and the empire he'd built from nothing. At night, I'd lie in my enormous bedroom in the East Wing and try to process the surreal turn my life had taken. Colt was everywhere and nowhere. I'd catch glimpses of him. In his office on phone calls that sounded like veiled threats, in the training room working out with an intensity that was almost violent, in the study late at night nursing whiskey and staring at documents I couldn't read from my doorway. He never spoke to me directly, never acknowledged my presence beyond brief nods when we passed in hallways. But I felt his awareness of me like a physical touch, the way you feel a storm building on the horizon. Then came the night everything changed. I woke to gunfire. The sharp crack, crack, crack of weapons firing split the night, followed by shouts and the screech of alarms. My body moved on instinct, rolling out of bed and grabbing the baseball bat I'd insisted on keeping despite the guards laughing at me. The hallway outside my room was chaos. Men in dark suits running with weapons drawn, orders being shouted in English and Spanish, the acrid smell of gunpowder already thick in the air. Dakota! One of the guards, Garcia, who'd been kind to me, grabbed my arm. Stay in your room. Lock the door. Where's Magnolia? Being secured. Now lock. Glass shattered somewhere below us. More gunfire. Garcia swore and ran toward the sound, leaving me alone in the hallway. I should have listened. Should have locked my door and hidden like he'd ordered. But all I could think about was Magnolia. All fragile and injured, caught in the middle of whatever hell had just broken loose. I ran toward her room. The East Wing was a maze of corridors I barely knew, but I'd walked them enough times in the past week to find my way by memory. Magnolia's suite was on the second floor overlooking the gardens, beautiful but also exposed. I found her door ajar, the room dark. Magnolia! I pushed inside, bat raised, my heart hammering so hard I could barely hear my own voice. Mum, are you… Movement behind me. Too fast. A hand clamped over my mouth, another snaking around my waist, pulling me back against a hard body. Don't scream! A voice hissed in my ear. Wrong voice. Not Colt, not any of the guards I'd met. Don't move, you're coming with us. Terror flooded my system, cold and absolute. I was going to die, or worse. This was it. The consequence of staying when I should have run. Then training I didn't remember receiving kicked in. My daddy might have been a drunk, but he'd taught me to fight before the bottle took him. I slammed my head backward, felt it connect with something that crunched. The hands loosened. I drove my elbow into ribs, twisted, brought the bat around with everything I had. The man dropped like a stone. But there were more. I saw them moving in the shadows, closing in. I backed toward the door, bat raised, and did the only thing I could think of. I screamed. Loud and long and furious, the response was immediate. The door exploded inward, and Colt was there, gun drawn, his face a mask of cold rage. He took in the scene, me, wild-eyed and armed with a bat, the unconscious man at my feet, the others frozen in various states of attacking, and something almost like admiration flickered across his face before the cold mask slammed back into place. What happened next took seconds but felt like hours. Colt moved through the room like death-given form, each movement precise and brutal. He didn't kill them, though God knows he could have, but when he was done, all 4 intruders were unconscious or wishing they were. Then he turned to me and I saw his hands shaking, not from exertion, from something else entirely. "You didn't run," he said, his voice rough. "Your mama is in the panic room with 20 guards. Has been since the first shot fired." He crossed the distance between us, his eyes searching my face for injuries. "You should have stayed in your room, locked the door like you were told." I didn't know she was safe. I thought, "You thought you could protect her?" He laughed, bitter and broken. "You stupid, brave, incredible woman. You could have been killed." But I wasn't. I was shaking now, the adrenaline draining away and leaving me weak. I wasn't. No. His hands framed my face, gentle despite the violence still humming through his body. "You fought. Of course you fought. Because you're Dakota Hayes from Dusty Springs, Montana, and you don't know how to do anything else." I stared at him, seeing past the dangerous Mafia boss to the man beneath, the one who carried impossible burdens, the one who loved his mother enough to buy a building to spare her the embarrassment of an awkward resignation, the one who was looking at me like I was something precious he couldn't quite believe was real. "Colt." He kissed me, hard and desperate and claiming, like he was drowning and I was air. I kissed him back with equal ferocity, the bat clattering to the floor as I wrapped my arms around his neck and held on like my life depended on it. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. "This is insane," he whispered. "Yeah, you should leave. Take the money and run, before this world destroys you." Maybe. I pulled back enough to meet his eyes. Or maybe I am exactly where I'm supposed to be. The aftermath of the attack was swift and brutal. Colt's response to the Rivera family made the news. Multiple arrests, properties seized, operations shut down. He never told me details, but I could read between the lines. The Riveras had made the mistake of threatening his mother. They would never make that mistake again. In the weeks that followed, something shifted between us. Colt stopped pretending I was just his mother's caretaker. I stopped pretending I didn't feel something dangerous and electric every time he entered a room. Magnolia watched us circle each other with knowing smiles and stopped even trying to hide her matchmaking. "You know she planned this," I told Colt one night, finding him in his study as had become my habit. The fall, the cafe, all of it. He looked up from his papers, one eyebrow raised. "Planned being assaulted by the Rivera family?" "No, but planned bringing me here." I settled into the chair across from his desk. "She's been telling me stories all week about your father, about how he found her working in a diner, about how he claimed her despite every reason it was a terrible idea." "My mother," Colt said dryly, "is a romantic who believes fate can be engineered with enough careful manipulation. And you don't believe in fate?" "I believe in choices, consequences, control." He set down his pen, his full attention on me now. "But then you walked into my life wielding a baseball bat and a complete disregard for your own safety, and suddenly I'm not sure what I believe anymore." My heart did something complicated in my chest. "Colt, I'm not a good man, Dakota." He stood, moved around the desk until he was close enough to touch but holding himself carefully separate. "I've done things that would make you run screaming. Built an empire on violence and fear and choices that haunt me every night. I can't offer you normal or safe or any of the things you deserve." "Good." I stood too, closing the distance he'd tried to maintain. Because I'm not looking for normal. I spent my whole life being invisible, being overlooked, being treated like I was less than nothing. You see me, Colt. You see me, and you're terrified of what that means, but you can't look away. No, he admitted, his control finally cracking. I can't. Then stop fighting it. I reached up, cupped his face in my hands. Stop acting like I'm fragile. Like I can't handle your world. I survived poverty and loss, and years of being treated like trash. I can survive you too. He caught my wrists, his grip gentle despite the intensity in his eyes. What if I don't want you to just survive? What if I want you to live, to be happy, to have everything this cruel world never gave you? Then give it to me. I pulled his face down to mine, all of it. The darkness and the danger and whatever twisted version of love you're capable of. I want all of it. He kissed me then, slow and deep and full of promises he couldn't put into words. And I kissed him back, tasting danger and devotion in equal measure. We broke apart only when Magnolia cleared her throat from the doorway. About time, she said, radiating satisfaction. I was beginning to think I'd have to trap you in an elevator. Colt groaned. You planned this. Of course I planned this. She smiled, leaning on her cane. Her ankle had healed weeks ago, but she kept the cane for dramatic effect. You think I accidentally fell in that cafe? Please, I've been dancing since I was 3. But I knew if I could just get you to see what I saw. She looked at me, her eyes warm. To a woman strong enough to stand beside you instead of behind you, smart enough to survive your world, brave enough to love you despite everything. I should have been angry, should have felt manipulated. Instead, I found myself laughing. You're terrifying, Magnolia Blackwood. I'm practical, she winked. Now I'll leave you two to your declarations. But Dakota, dear, if you hurt my son, I have ways of making people disappear that would astonish you. Madre, Colt warned. Just saying. She waved her cane airily as she left. Just saying. When she was gone, Colt pulled me back into his arms and I went willingly, resting my head against his chest and listening to his heartbeat. You know this won't be easy, he said quietly. My world. It's dangerous. There will always be another family trying to take what's ours. Another threat. Another reason to be afraid. Then we'll face them together. I tilted my head back to look at him. I didn't survive everything I survived just to hide from life now. Whatever comes, we handle it. Together. Together, he echoed, and sealed the promise with a kiss that tasted like forever. 6 months later, I stood in the Silver Spur Café, now under new management, cleaner, kinder, and watched as people came and went. No longer invisible service workers, but individuals treated with basic dignity. Colt had bought the building not to close it, but to transform it into something better. You didn't have to do this, I told him, lacing my fingers through his. Yes, I did. He kissed my temple. This is where I found you. Where my mother's scheme changed everything. It seemed fitting to make sure it became something worth remembering. Magnolia smiled from her seat by the window, holding court like the queen she was, charming the new staff and making sure everyone knew the story of how a poor waitress had helped a fallen woman and changed 2 lives forever. She's going to tell that story until the day she dies, I said. Probably. Colt pulled me closer. And she'll embellish it more every time. Think she'll mention that she planned the whole thing? Never, he grinned, rare and beautiful. That would ruin the romance of it. I laughed, leaning into his warmth, and thought about how strange life was, how a single moment of kindness could ripple into something unexpected and perfect. How sometimes the most dangerous choices led to the safest places, and how, once in a while, when you helped a fallen stranger without thinking twice, you didn't just change their life, you transformed your own.